shrapnel and a hellhound on my track. When I made it to my home place, I found triumph of the will. Where once lay a shining city, stood a fortress on a hill.
Hey, listeners. Hey, this is our first pod with all three of us doing headlines, and I'm pretty excited, and I think the back and forth should only be stronger. We each have two today, so we'll see how long this goes, but we've got some pretty interesting topics, a diverse array of the madness that is the media space and the news space right now. My first headline, well, it's not really a headline. It's a conglomeration of bullshit that has happened ever since Donald Trump, before the holidays, talked about pulling troops out of Syria and Afghanistan. Now, it remains to be seen if that's actually going to happen, because every day there's a new Republican who wants to convince us that he has, convinced Trump to wait. But I'm not so sure. I think Trump's pretty serious about this one. But what I really want to rant about is Jim Mattis, who is no longer my defense secretary, and therefore I can say some stuff about. And then Rachel Maddow and the MSNBC crowd. Specifically, what I'm worried about here is liberal hawks and the hypocrisy of so-called quote-unquote liberals who suddenly sound more pro-war than most of the people on the right. And I just want to know how that happened. I want to know how Trump's decision to pull troops out of Syria, a dubiously legal war that was more risk than reward, and pulling half the troops out of Afghanistan, which is America's longest and I would argue most unwinnable war in its history, I don't see how those are bad things. Now, if a neoconservative like Bill Kristol comes on TV, and oh, by the way, he's on MSNBC now. Anyone else think that's crazy? That's fucking crazy.
Oh,
but
that's dumb.
If someone like Bill Kristol comes on TV and says, hey, we should stay in Syria forever, an unabashed neocon, then I'm like, okay, I get it. He's part of the old guard. He's a monster, and we have to just write him off. But when liberals, intelligent liberals like Rachel Maddow, whatever you think of her politics, whatever you think of her stance on Russiagate, which I think is off the rails, by the way, this is an intelligent woman, highly intelligent, and she even knows something about foreign policy. She wrote a book called Drift in 2012. This was one of the best foreign policy books I've ever read from mainstream outlets ever. She argues cogently that ever since the end of the Vietnam War, American militarism and U.S. military interventionism has gone off the rails, has become unmoored, hence the title Drift. I read the book and I was impressed. This is a woman who's gone on TV during the Obama administration and talks about how we've been at war so long that now it seems normal, and that's not a good thing, and that's not a good enough reason to stay. But as soon as Mr. Trump comes out and says leaving Syria might be a good idea, who's the first one to line up and say he's wrong, that we need to keep the troops in Syria? It's old Rachel at MSNBC. It's even Jake Tapper at CNN, who I sometimes have a lot of respect for. It's a whole version of liberal media hawks who suddenly want to be more militarist than anyone on the right. And there's only one explanation: Trump. Their ludicrous, pathological hatred of this president. A president that I've spent 2 years, or the greater part of 2 years, critiquing his policies at every turn. So I'm no lover of the president, although for like 29 more days he's my commander-in-chief. But regardless of that, their pathological obsession with Trump and negating anything Trump does has gone against their better instincts. They've sold their consciences, and they've also sold their intellectual credibility. Final point on this matter is Jim canonized, soon-to-be Saint Mattis. Ever since Trump took over, the adults in the room, we've been told by CNN, MSNBC, centrist Democrats and centrist Republicans in the Senate. We've been told that what Bob Woodward claims they called themselves, which is the Committee to Save America, really a triumvirate of three generals, McMaster, Kelly, and Mattis, they've been working against Trump from the beginning. They've been working against his instinct to pull out of some of these wars, to the extent that he has that instinct. Obviously he's inconsistent. But at the times he's wanted to pull out, these folks, led by Mattis, have gone against the president, subverted his policy, what he was elected on, and have tried to push him in the opposite direction. And what have they given us, these adults in the room? More war, more bombing, more drones, more money spent, more blood spilled, both ours and even more so, civilians on the ground. Why in the world do we adulate these generals? Is it just because they're generals? Or is it because deep down in the heart of every MSNBC liberal is the insecurity that perhaps they don't have the credibility to talk about foreign policy? So they better hide behind some generals. I'm sick of it. I'm sick of adulating generals precisely because they are generals. Let us not forget, there is a big difference between combat leadership at the battalion and the brigade level and courage in combat and prudent policy making. Those are two different things. Being a general does not necessarily qualify you to know what's best for the country. It doesn't mean you're good at choosing which war to fight. It means you're good at fighting the war you've been given. And I would argue that the triumvirate of generals, McMaster, Kelly, and the recently gone Mattis, were wrong at every turn about which battles we should fight. Perhaps they should have stuck to fighting the battles they were given. Rant complete for now, and I will turn over the floor to my dear friends.
So I feel you, Danny, and I'm in complete agreement. I was trying to think of what regulation it would fall under if a commander-in-chief actually observed these things and wanted to punish his generals for them subverting his own mission plans, but I can't think of any specific one off the top of my head. But I do have something in the way of a little bit of good news. It's not all the time that we get to share a little bit of good news, but this feels genuinely good. A fellow named Bill Arkin, longtime war correspondent with the Washington Post, who was most recently working at MSNBC, has departed MSNBC, and on his way out the door, he circulated a letter among his colleagues that ended up getting leaked to other news outlets, where he specifically discussed why MSNBC's warmongering had driven him out, how the military is able to do what it wants without debate or examination, and how the U.S. military has effectively turned to technology to kill its enemies, almost entirely bypassing U.S. military casualties as a metric for military success or failure. Now, here is a clip of Bill speaking to Democracy Now! Yesterday.
Mingling out NBC, I was just most familiar with it. And my decision not to renew my contract was really one of thinking to myself that I wanted to stand back and think more about what we needed to do in order to change our national security policy. We've been at war now for 18 years. I don't think anybody could argue that there's a country in the Middle East that's safer today than it was in 2001. The generals and the national security leadership that runs the country, and now also is the commentators and the analysts who populate the news media, really are not people who we can look to as saying, wow, they won a war, they avoided a war, they achieved some magnificent objective. In fact, they are the custodians and the architects of perpetual warfare. And it seemed to me like there needed to be both a different voice and a solution. And I want to step back myself and think about how we can end this era of perpetual war and how we can build some real security. Both
manipulates the network TV shows, which is validating an issue you have criticized for so long and investigated for so long, the national security state.
Well, you know, I've been associated with television for 30 years. I've been a journalist for about the same period of time, but it's not my background. My background was in Army intelligence, and then thereafter I wrote books about the military. And I was called upon to be a journalist because there was a desire on the part of the Los Angeles Times, Washington Post, and NBC to have experts helping people to understand an incredibly complex issue, national security. In those days, when I started, we used to have civilian experts on the air, people who weren't former government officials, people who weren't retired generals, people who might be university professors or activists who worked in non-governmental organizations or experts who were associated with think tanks. Something happened post 9/11, something happened in this intervening years in which those people virtually disappeared from the airwaves. And we don't see as many anymore. And in fact, we increasingly see journalists who are the commentators on what's going on. Now, that's a tricky position because journalists are supposed to be unbiased, but also at the same time, they're supposed to be explaining to the public what's going on with inside information. But the end result of it is that we become shallower and shallower in our coverage, particularly in an area like national security. We've just become so shallow that we're not really able even to see the truth, which is that we're at war right now in 9 countries around the world where we're bombing, and we hardly report any of it on a day-to-day basis. So to me, the crisis is that we condone perpetual war by virtue of our lack of reporting and investigation. And then second, we fill the airwaves or we fill the newspapers with stories about the immediate and don't give an adequate amount of space to deeper investigations or what I would say would be net assessment investigations of what really is going on. I mean, whether we should or shouldn't withdraw troops from Syria, whether we should or shouldn't withdraw troops from Afghanistan, whether we should or we shouldn't improve our relations with Russia, whether we should or we shouldn't pursue denuclearization in the Korean Peninsula, all of these questions deserve a high degree of investigation and reporting beyond the question of whether or not Donald Trump is a buffoon. And we just don't do it. We're just not doing it. And so to me, I'm not necessarily interested in prescribing the why. I'm interested in changing the culture so that we can, in fact, better inform ourselves about national security so that the citizenry can play a more powerful role in influencing our national security policy.
I wanted to expand on that.
Well, there's no question that the national security establishment has grown and it has become far more powerful than it ever was. But here's the change. We've shifted from the industrial age to the information age. And consequently, we've also shifted from the dominance of the military-industrial complex, if you will, to a much more insidious and much more difficult to diagnose information complex. So the advent of contractors, the advent of a professional military, which means that the military itself touches fewer and fewer lives in America, all of those work together to make the national security state more and more embedded within our society, but yet at the same time more difficult to get to, more difficult to understand. So most people would be surprised to learn, for instance, that Amazon is one of the largest defense contractors, that they're building the cloud and they're building the data centers which support the intelligence community and support the military. And there are other civilian companies that we associate with being civilians who are also terrific beneficiaries of the military's largesse. So to me, to diagnose properly where we stand today, the point of the Top Secret America investigation was to show the wild growth of all areas of national security and this new invention of homeland security, if you will, but at the same time to point out that it wasn't something that was necessarily segregated from our society. It was more and more embedded within our society, and that made it more and more difficult to analyze properly and to do something about.
So you talked about the people.
Hold on one second, guys.
Yeah, it's coming in pretty low over here.
Okay. Yeah. But you are hearing it, though?
I'm hearing it, but extremely low.
Extremely low.
And maybe it's better on the recording.
No. Yeah, the recording is a lot better, but I had it up at full volume earlier, and I'm not sure why it's, you can't hear it better.
Mingling out NBC, I was just most familiar
How's that?
with it. And my
Great.
decision
That's better.
not to renew my contract was really one of thinking to myself that I wanted to stand back and think more about what we needed to do in order to change our national security policy. We've been at war now for 18 years. I don't think anybody could argue that there's a country in the Middle East that's safer today than it was in 2001. The generals and the national security leadership that runs the country, and now also is the commentators and the analysts who populate the news media, really are not people who we can look to as saying, wow, they won a war, they avoided a war, they achieved some magnificent objective. In fact, they are the custodians and the architects of perpetual warfare. And it seemed to me like there needed to be both a different voice and a solution. And I want to step back myself and think about how we can end this era of perpetual war and how we can build some real security. Both
Populates the network TV shows, which is validating an issue you have criticized for so long and investigated for so long, the national security state.
Well, you know, I've been associated with television for 30 years. I've been a journalist for about the same period of time, but it's not my background. My background was in Army intelligence, and then thereafter I wrote books about the military. And I was called upon to be a journalist because there was a desire on the part of the Los Angeles Times, Washington Post, and NBC to have experts helping people to understand an incredibly complex issue, national security. In those days when I started, we used to have civilian experts on the air, people who weren't former government officials, people who weren't retired generals, people who might be university professors or activists who worked in non-governmental organizations or experts who were associated with think tanks. Something happened post 9/11, something happened in this intervening years in which those people virtually disappeared from the airwaves. And we don't see as many anymore. And in fact, we increasingly see journalists who are the commentators on what's going on. Now, that's a tricky position because journalists are supposed to be unbiased, but also at the same time, they're supposed to be explaining to the public what's going on with inside information. But the end result of it is that we become shallower and shallower in our coverage, particularly in an area like national security. We've just become so shallow that we're not really able even to see the truth, which is that we're at war right now in 9 countries around the world where we're bombing, and we hardly report any of it on a day-to-day basis. So to me, the crisis is that we condone perpetual war by virtue of our lack of reporting and investigation. And then second, we fill the airwaves or we fill the newspapers with stories about the immediate and don't give an adequate amount of space to deeper investigations or
All right, I'll put the full clip on the episode. Let me turn on make sure my stuff's all off here. All right. So there was one important point that he was talking about there, talking about a movement from the industrial age of military action and warfare to the technology age. And immediately I started thinking of all the huge companies that different parts of the military deal with. Here's some good examples. 3M recently had a settlement with the Army over, I think it was like 8.3 million pairs of earplugs, which they actually found out were defective and did not do what they were supposed to do for the soldiers that were issuing them. You have a company like Boeing. Most people don't think of Boeing as a defense contractor. We think of them as building luxury airliners and, you know, nice guys up in Seattle. Well, they're a multi-billion-dollar defense contractor. They're the largest one. Our current acting Secretary of Defense, Patrick Shanahan, worked there for 30 years. Now, Bill also goes into a little bit about the media circus surrounding President Trump, even going so far as calling out Democracy Now! Itself for playing a clip of Trump opening their episode, saying it was making fun of him. Amy Goodman did challenge him on the making fun part, but the rest, Bill is dead on. The media gives Trump a ton of play, and it's just from airing his bullshit. It's not analysis, it's barely commentary. And hell, in keeping with our discussion about Rachel Maddow and her Russia coverage, Trump is at the nexus of the whole Russiagate media circus. Not the actual investigation of Robert Mueller, mind you, but the us versus them Russia hysteria. The reason it gets so much play is that people can hear Trump getting bashed at every turn. News tonight: Paul Manafort violated some agreement between him and Mueller again. So let's talk about Paul Manafort and Donald Trump again. Yes, I heard Forrest Gump when I was writing this, so now all of you can too. Trump is the Trojan horse. That he and his bullshit and his staff and their bullshit are just taking up all the air in the room and not allowing other things to be in there. But just to wrap up on Bill, I hope everybody listening will listen to his full interview from Democracy Now!, read the series he wrote for the Washington Post in 2010. It was called Top Secret America. And please read the entirety of his resignation letter from NBC. All of those items will be in the show notes. Journalists like Bill, like Matthew Ho, like you, Danny, you guys are really rare breeds. Bill, an actual anti-war veteran who was able to remain in mainstream journalism for decades, but whose views have now become politically defunct and even considered unpatriotic. And Danny, leaving the Army after 18 years because your views, despite being evidence-based and experience-based, are in service considered inflammatory. And I can't tell you how horrified I am at the Army as an institution for relieving itself of even the pretense of professionalism, defeat being called victory, and forcing soldiers to accept less and less for their sweat and blood expended on the battlefield.
It's a great point. I'm encouraged by the moral fortitude showed by Bill Arkin here. I'm a little surprised by it, frankly, because this happens so rarely, right? That someone actually takes a stand. You're right about being in the Army. The last thing I want to do is make it about myself, but certainly, look, when you write the things that I write and you go on, the radio and say the things I say, you're asking for trouble. The Army likes to pride itself on supposedly being this thinking organization that wants you to challenge convention, but that's not actually true. They're willing to let you pontificate about the best way to do counterinsurgency, right? You can write about that in Military Review. You can write an article about that on War on the Rocks, but question the very premise of counterinsurgency. Question the very premise of the way we use the tool that is our military and the way we waste our own lives and take the lives of others. Do that, and suddenly, I can tell you from experience, you're persona non grata. And I think the same goes even on the liberal, quote-unquote, network like MSNBC.
Absolutely. Listening to him talk about commentators, it brought me back to thinking about the Pentagon program that existed in the beginning of the Iraq War that brought retired defense and intel officials onto MSNBC, CNN, etc., but never disclosed that they were part of that at the time. Nobody could know that they were actually being paid by the DoD through that.
Which is incredibly dangerous, right, to the Republic, just in a general sense.
Oh, God, yes. So, BT, what are you thinking over there, brother?
So, the other day, there was an article that I had commented on in like one of those War on the Rocks or whatever, and it turned out to be talking about how the Iraq War was started, and I had mentioned that it was started by like plain lies. There's no justification for our occupation. I believe it was like, if we just had more intelligence, if we had more ways to get data and metrics, that we could have won if we would have paid attention to the history, which I guess is really telling, because I think it's pretty rare to hear that kind of talk, that actual self-criticism that isn't looked at very often. But it doesn't do very much, because you're just like, oh, well, if I would have done this self-fulfilling prophecy, then we would have won this war. And the point came to the person responded to me saying that, well, it wasn't American lies. The president didn't lie to get us into the war. It was failures of the intelligence agency. And I think it's really dangerous to have that kind of thought, because that puts the idea that, one, that again, there were no lies, which is patently false. I mean, we have, just example after example of how we were lied to, and, the wars that the media have been portraying for these almost 2 decades now have all been based upon lies, and still no one's talking about that.
Well, you make a great point about the way criticism is controlled and allowed within the military, because you brought up the Iraq invasion, which is, of course, the best case in point for all this. Here are the things you're allowed to say while still in uniform and maintain friends and promotions. You can say, oh, we should have taken more troops. Oh, we should have worked better in intelligence. Oh, we should have understood the culture more. Oh, we shouldn't have disbanded the Iraqi army, right? Those things are all okay. Oh, we should have started doing Petraeus-style coin earlier, right? All that is acceptable. But the minute you say, wait, the strategic ends, ways, and means of the Iraq invasion never lined up and were never in the interest, the national vital strategic interest of the United States, and therefore the very legal basis for it was flawed, and of course the lies told to justify it were illegal. Once you start saying that, that's it, man. You're asking for trouble, because that's outside the box criticism. The military only accepts inside the box minute criticism. They're okay with you questioning tactics, but don't you dare question strategy.
It's such a headache in words there, Danny. No, thinking about the story we went through a couple episodes ago about Niger, and about how that the mistakes of the ambush that happened there in October 2017 were originally all laid at the captain and below level, when it was very, very clear from us reading news articles here that there was other senior leaders responsible, but it was only because Mattis specifically got involved in that it was changed. Like you're saying, is that the tactical, we can talk about that all day long, but when it becomes to the big picture, nah, you're just wrong. Sorry, you're wrong. You're wrong like Trump.
Absolutely.
To the Bill Aker things too, it's interesting because he talked about, journalists are supposed to be biased, but also informing the viewers. But at the same time, you have the experts on, but it's not these, older style news where, you have the expert on and you ask actual questions. Most all news today is, you got the 9 Partridge Family heads moving around and yelling at each other and talking over each other. And you bring up one point, and that point is never actually addressed, and the article ends, and people just end up angry because you always have somebody who says something inflammatory.
But that's the messed up part, is that why should strategy questions be inflammatory in the first place? Why can't someone present this picture, whoever it happens to be, military experience or not, and say, isn't this wrong? Are you guys looking at the same numbers and figures and newspaper articles that I'm looking at and saying this is right? But that's the thing, is that the walls of it don't even allow any bulging. You can't touch it. It's like somebody's like the Pillsbury Doughboys tickle point. The moment, woo, and we've forgotten what the hell we were talking about.
Absolutely.
Yep.
I just pictured Trump dressed up as the Pillsbury Doughboy. I really didn't eat that today. That's gross. Woo! All right. BT, you want to talk to us about what's going on in the West Los Angeles VA?
Yeah, so the West Los Angeles VA, for me personally, has been problematic, and it's something that I've, written and talked about pretty extensively. But the a story came out from a whistleblower that there is a long-term therapy program for PTSD. And this happened back in August. There were 20 groups that had 5 to 30 members. And they met for 40 hours a week of therapy.
Was this an inpatient program?
From my understanding, it's an outpatient program. It's like a meeting group.
Okay.
I'm not sure who. I'm not going to point any blame because I want to make sure that I know what I'm talking about. But somebody in the upper level of the leadership of the VA ordered for this PTSD group to move to a smaller room. They said, we need this room for something else, so we want to give you this room. And the response was, hey, this room is really small for the number of people that we have, and there's no privacy. Like we can't maintain the privacy standards that we're supposed to have as a mental health provider. Said, well, this the PTSD group isn't being funded anymore, and you're being disbanded, and we will replace this 40-hour-a-week therapy with a large established group and something that has been scientifically proven and is effective and is part of ongoing research. And we are going to replace it with a limited 12-week PTSD program that once you complete that 12 weeks, you're out of the program because you're done. Whereas the program that was just shut down was an open-ended program. There was no getting out of it. So the VA says that they don't have enough money to do this, which is patently absurd, because you have the VA being asked to shut down animal research that it is conducting, that people are specifically saying, like, we don't need this, while simultaneously refusing to research things like the Gulf War syndrome, burn pit illnesses, and just a number of medical problems that are coming in the military and veteran community and the families. And at the same time, article came out just today saying that the military is looking at cutting 17,000 healthcare professional billets over the next couple years for, quote, increasing lethality. Not sure what that means, but
they want to change the spots into 18X special forces something, or more infantry or something like that. But dear God, it's a fucking horrible idea. We need doctors in service, because that way they understand what troops are going through. And the thing about it is that I'm assuming Trump wants it to get all dumped on this new VA Community Care, VA Mission Act bullshit. Is that we pull out some of these programs, and then they're like, hey, come over here and do this. And they slowly, 1, 2, 3, start stacking the pancakes to move us all towards privatization. And again, I don't know if that's specifically connected to this group, but that's horrible for the guys in the group for a number of reasons. First of all, their care. Second, they thought they were going to get care, a very specific kind of care, and then it gets fucking taken from them. Wow.
This whole privatization venture, I mean, it's a red herring. It's a Trojan horse. It was the same for Social Security. My advice to listeners is this: whenever you start hearing the word privatization and it comes from a guy who's richer than you, run. Do the exact opposite thing. All this free market bullshit. Look, I'm not saying there's no place for the free market. What I am saying is that certain things in the public interest cannot and should not be left to the private motive. And you notice the people always calling for either the privatization of Social Security or now the privatization of the VA or VA treatment, they always have more money than you. They always have enough that they could get their own care, right? That they can afford whatever care they want on the market. But you now have to be willing to go through the exact same thing that they are, except you don't have the means to do it. So the whole thing is a Trojan horse. And I'm so against VA privatization for all the reasons I listed and many more.
Absolutely. It needs to expand. The government part of it actually needs to get bigger. But yeah, it's just every little hole in the dam that they can make. Absolutely.
You talked about, troops wanting to go to a specific counselor. I know, I've probably gone through 25 different therapists, combination of whatever. And I mean, there was only one that I ever really felt comfortable with, and that was an Army officer. I don't know if it was something psychological, because there were other soldiers that I didn't get along with, but like of a good half of them were civilian providers. I could never connect with a civilian provider, because no matter what kind of horror that, I've seen and I've gone through, there's just no connection, as opposed to actually going to a military provider where you at least have the chance of having somebody who's been exposed to the horrible kind of things that, we've experienced.
Absolutely. And I wish they made more money, by the way, the people who work for the VA, but that's not what I want motivating them. I want the people who work for the VA to have chosen public service specifically, right? That's how I prefer it. And that's why I fear privatization, because when you make the god of profit the main focus, it's almost always problematic, and it's not necessarily going to recruit the people you want, just like you said.
And it's important to point out about what we're going through right now with the government shutdown. I don't think it has affected any main VA functions, but speaking back to about the workers, Danny, about their motivations, that a third of all federal employees are veterans. And a lot of the guys that work at the VA are also veterans. They do this, their willingness to go through government shutdowns and try to stay afloat, to me, demonstrates that, hey, yeah, we're there for our brothers and sisters. We're there, yes, we do get paid for what we do, and they should earn a living wage, but that's not why they do it. And most of them, yeah, they work, like the nurses I've dealt with when I've been an inpatient, they're all in 12-hour shifts. They work incredibly hard for the little bit they get paid. But at the same time, BT, you've told me some stories about your experience that are just fucked up. That's the simplest way for me to tie that off right there. And we have to acknowledge those experiences as well. And I myself have had a couple bad ones. I don't know that I've ever talked on the podcast about any of those, but the VA can be the best thing for us and still always keep doing better. And it's on us, the three of us here sitting here talking as veterans, to pursue our own care. But listeners, if there's a veteran in your life that you care about, help them advocate with the VA. Watch the VA in the news and what they're doing, because the more voices go to senators when voting time comes, the more good things happen.
Yeah, let's not quit on government. Let's improve government. That's my point.
Absolutely. I'm 100%.
I agree.
Hey everyone. I really hope you're enjoying the podcast. But truth be told, I need your help. No, I don't need you to move a couch or borrow a leaf blower. No, I need you to hit pause on your podcasting app right now and share this episode with somebody you know, somebody who you might think might be receptive to it. It could be a friend or relative who's considering joining the military, or a veteran you know who might be interested in hearing a little more truth in their news about military and veterans. We rely on you all to help us reach as many people as possible. So please hit that pause button right now and share this episode with somebody. Sharing all done? Good? Okay, good deal. I know Uncle Al will cuss a lot listening to the episode, but he'll appreciate it when the cursing stops. Now I want to mention something about Patreon. we are always in the market for more Patreon supporters. So if you get the chance, please come out and support us. You could support us for as little as $1 a month. And what do you get for your dollar, you ask? Well, you get a 1-minute drop on any topic you choose once a month. Just email us your question or comment, and we'll give it the old Henry Danny breakdown on air. Guaranteed to have 60 seconds of our time. We may spend more on it. We prefer to do military and veteran topics, but whatever topic you think might be pertinent. And we may spend a whole bunch more time talking about it, depending on the topic. And for contributors, a bit north of $1 a month, we have some bonus episodes, some essays of mine, and a few other things as well. We're still in the process of building our rewards, so if you have any suggestions for Patreon rewards, please let me know. Now, back to the podcast. Fortress on a Hill is expanding. We're going to start doing chapter series as part of our lineup. There are some topics that are simply too big and important to leave to discussing in a single headline. And with that in mind, I'd like to thank all of our honorary producers who are helping us do just that. We rely on the support of our patrons through Patreon to help keep the podcast a success. Thank you to Matthew Ho, Will Arens, Gage Counts, Fahim Shirazi, Henry Zamoda, James Higgins, and James O'Barr. Anyone who contributes $10 or more a month on Patreon will be listed here as an honorary producer. And to all of our contributors on Patreon, thank you for helping us do this. So, Danny, what was your final headline today?
My final headline today is hard for me. It's hard for me because I'm of two minds about this woman that I'm about to talk about, and that is Elizabeth Warren, the senator from Massachusetts, who has made quite a name for herself in the last 6 years in the Senate. Liz Warren is someone I have had a lot of respect for, especially on domestic issues, especially as it relates to banking and the income inequality in this country and improving health care. She's one of the loudest and most eloquent voices. And yet she's also earthy. She's sort of a common sense lady who grew up very poor in Oklahoma and was a single mother and put herself through a PhD program while raising kids right before she remarried. She's got a great story and she's pretty inspiring. Nobody takes apart a Wells Fargo bank CEO on the floor of the Senate like she does.
It's pretty awesome to watch.
It's incredible. It's like one of my favorite things. I watch it like it's ESPN. I watch it like it's highlights from the latest basketball game. But that's why I'm a dork and unlikely ever to be loved again by a woman. But anyway, point being that Liz Warren is really interesting, and I like her a lot. But she just announced that she's making an exploratory committee for running for president, meaning she's essentially the first Democrat to declare for the presidency, the first big-name Democrat to declare for the presidency. And I mostly write about foreign policy, okay? That's my expertise. That's my experience. And so whenever I look at a candidate, I want to look at their foreign policy. And the truth is, Elizabeth Warren doesn't have a whole lot of foreign policy experience. And she doesn't have a whole lot of foreign policy credentials, which doesn't necessarily mean she wouldn't be a good foreign policy president, because some of our most qualified foreign policy presidents were people like Nixon and George H.W. Bush, with all their flaws. But she hasn't been really outspoken about foreign policy for the most part. Two things that I have appreciated about her is that her website for a long time has called for a hasty withdrawal from Afghanistan, so that's a win. And in fact, unlike most of the MSNBC liberals that I just talked about, she actually came out in support of President Trump's decision to pull out of Syria. So that's all the good stuff. But then I come across this article that's just been flying through the Twitter sphere and flying through the Facebook world. And it's from The Intercept, outlet that you all know I love. And it's actually written by Glenn Greenwald of The Intercept. And it says, I think the headline is something to the effect of, You know, we've been wondering what Elizabeth Warren's stance on Israel is, and now we know. And it's basically horrible. It's a conglomeration of pretty much every comment she's ever publicly made at town halls or in the Senate or in speeches about Israel-Palestine. And what's really concerning about it is she sounds like a mainstream Democrat, or quite frankly, more like a mainstream Republican when it comes to Israel-Palestine. I mean, we're talking rote party line stuff. She wouldn't even agree to condemn Israeli building of settlements illegally on Palestinian land. What does that tell us? Well, some people might say, well, Danny, that's one issue. Are you gonna pull your support from her? Are you gonna, rain on her parade because of one issue? Well, no, that's not what I'm saying. But this is a big issue, because this is an issue about courage. Because as we all know, the one thing that, if as a writer, as a politician, or as a media pundit, if you want to avoid trouble, what's rule number one, Henry? Don't talk about Israel. Just leave it alone. Just leave it alone. I've called it in the past. I even wrote an article called The Third Rail of Politics, right? Don't touch the third rail of Israel, because there is a huge and powerful Israel lobby in the United States. It has immense effect and immense influence on both the Republicans and the Democrats. Israel is one of the only issues where even a left-wing, a hard left-wing Democrat, sounds like a conservative when they talk about Israel. Very rarely do even liberals demonstrate any real sympathy for the Palestinians, demonstrate any real impartiality on this issue, or any moral sense. So why does it scare me? It scares me because if Liz Warren's foreign policy is not fully formed yet, and it appears that it's not, she hasn't spent a lot of time on it, okay, in her time in the Senate. She's not on a lot of foreign committees, okay? Most of her work is domestic. That's where her interests lie. That's where her expertise lies. That's great. But she's going to have to be president of the United States. She's going to have to be the leader of the free world. And as we know, the president has 10 times more power unilaterally on foreign policy than the president, he or she, does on domestic policy, because ultimately the Senate and the House has much of the influence there, okay? This article worried me. And what I want to do with this article is I want to dig deeper. I want to challenge Liz Warren on Israel-Palestine. I want to see if her opinions have evolved. I believe this initial article was from 2014, so it's old. She hasn't said a whole lot since then. But I want to open a discussion. I want to open a dialogue here on the pod and with listeners, if you want to, write in questions or pass out some research maybe you found. And I'm just hoping that her really atrocious stance, really horribly anti-Palestinian stance on this issue is not proof, all right, or is not an indicator of future moral cowardice in foreign policy. So that's kind of what I wanted to say about Liz Warren. Look, am I writing her off? No, I'm not there yet. But what I will say is there are some disturbing trends that are out there if you scratch below the surface of her sort of celebrity that she's developed.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I got a bad taste in my mouth for her, especially with the Palestine stuff. There was, like you mentioned about Wells Fargo, she is, on domestic affairs, especially anything involving consumers, she's amazing. She's just really good, and she absolutely cares about, I think, about all Americans. But how can she care about all Americans as president, as, potentially becoming a president, if Palestinian Americans are not accepting of her? Because that's what will happen. Now, granted, the Israel lobby is far, far more powerful than any kind of Palestinian lobbying going on in the U.S., but you have to be a president for everybody. Donald Trump was elected because he wanted to be president for white people, but he's president of white people and everybody else too. And so I think the Palestinian stuff with Liz Warren is very telling.
Yeah, it's concerning me, and I have a feeling this isn't the last issue we're going to be concerned about with regards to her foreign policy.
Yeah, I don't have too much. Just anytime you have a opinion where, you know, somebody is essentially less than human, less than deserving of, you know, someone else, it always just leaves the room open for, you know, well, let's go invade this country. It always leaves the room open for the militant viewpoints. And I definitely think, you know, that's why it's there.
Danny, you mentioning about, you know, the unilateral powers of the president when it comes to foreign affairs, and my next thing is going to be talking about the CIA, and that means that the entire situation in Syria and what the CIA is doing about it would be in the hands of somebody who feels really strongly about Israel. How does that change that calculus? And again, I would, I guess it would even be fair to say Donald Trump probably is still to the right of her on Palestine and on Israel, period. But that's still really terrifying.
Absolutely.
So, since we're on the Central Intelligence Agency, I want to talk a little bit about our recent election. I shared an article last year from the World Socialist website by Patrick Martin, and he did a series discussing all the congressional candidates in 2018 who had defense or intelligence backgrounds. Now, the Washington Post reported recently that only 3 of the CIA Democrats, as Patrick called them, won their elections, although the new ones brings a total of 10 congressional members who dealt with classified information before being elected, whether that's through defense or intelligence service. There's people like Elisa Slotkin, who was a, quote, former CIA operative with 3 tours in Iraq, who worked as Iraq director for the National Security Council in the Obama White House and as a top aide to John Negroponte, the first director of national intelligence. After her deep involvement in U.S. war crimes in Iraq, Slotkin moved to the Pentagon, where, as a principal deputy assistant secretary of defense for international security affairs, her responsibilities included, quote, drone warfare, homeland defense, and cyber warfare. Then we have Representative William Hurd, who worked undercover in the CIA in the Middle East and South Asia. He's currently serving in Texas's 23rd District, has been since 2015. Then there's people like Abigail Spanberger, a former undercover CIA agent who worked in Western Europe. She claims that, quote, leaving the CIA was the biggest loss of my life. I mourn the agency. I miss it every day. For so many of us with national security backgrounds, bringing our history of public service without a partisan lens is important, and it's a skill set, Spanberger said. Quote, we serve the mission under Republican and Democratic presidents. And do keep in mind, as I'm talking about all this, that most Americans still hold the intelligence services in high regard. Rachel Maddow recently did a story on how 3 of the highest ranking women in the CIA are, of the highest ranking positions in the CIA are now all held by women. If you believe the CIA to be an ethically driven agency, you might celebrate that. But for us, it just means that the 3 highest ranking torturers in our government are now all women. But back to Congresswoman Spanberger. She discusses that Langley is, quote, hallowed ground. So how does that work? How does that work for a journalist to hear a politician say that they feel Langley is hallowed ground? Politics is very much about appearance. How does that work for someone whose background can't be vetted by journalists? And given a person's natural inclination to trust what they're told, this gives the CIA a perfect way to launder their image without talking about what they actually do. Government service in Spanberger's case is definitely an asset. As people hear the CIA, they understand the power dynamic, and they give other questions they might have about her little credence.
I'm reminded of glass ceilings in general, and my ambivalence about celebrating the breaking of glass ceilings. Obviously, I'm excited to have a female president as soon as possible, as long as she is someone better than Hillary Clinton. Obviously, I think that the day there are 50 female senators and 50 male senators, well, that'll be a good day, right? So I'm not saying that I'm against breaking through glass ceilings, but when we celebrate someone in a national security position simply because they're female and assume that simply because they are female, they'll be a kinder, gentler version of said national security state entity, we're fooling ourselves. We're fooling ourselves. We haven't had a female president yet, but guess who's had a female prime minister? Britain. And I'm not talking about Theresa May. I'm talking about Maggie Thatcher back in the 80s. And she was a disaster for British unions. She was a disaster for the Catholics of Northern Ireland, right? She was a warmonger. She was to the right of Reagan, okay? So sometimes the first few people who break the gender glass ceiling, they're not necessarily touchy-feely, okay? That in itself is sexist to even think that, right? Oftentimes, we have to be, look, truly being gender non-biased is judging the person by their position, all right, by their policy positions, okay? So Gina Haspel, because she's a female, that doesn't make her a hero to me, okay? Her role in CIA torture prior to becoming the head of the agency, okay, that disqualifies her so far as I'm concerned. The fact that she's a woman doesn't change that calculus for me. In fact, I think if I was more sympathetic to her just because she was a woman, that would be a form of sort of sexism in and of itself. So, yeah, I mean, it concerns me when anybody considers Langley to be hollowed ground after everything the CIA has done since its, formation in 1947, and especially since the War on Terror began in 2001.
Absolutely. BT, did you have something, brother?
I don't really have anything to contribute on that one.
Okay.
I think you guys said it really well.
So as I'm going through this article about Congresswoman Spanberger, I'm hearing the little drips of, I can keep all the secrets, she says. I've helped the rough men in the night keep you safe while you sleep in your bed, she says. My expertise can't be completely vetted or understood because what I did was too important for ordinary people to know, but trust me, I'm on your side. Wink, wink. I wrote that. It's not her, that's the frame of mind that I see here. That's the frame of mind of somebody like that, because if this was Danny, what would happen to somebody if this was a military officer and they specifically talked about hallowed ground about certain things and such? Would that be acceptable?
I hope not. I mean, and I think the military is a better overall organization than the spy agency as well, just because so much more oversight exists. Even though there's not enough oversight, there's at least more oversight. But if your loyalty remains to the military when you become a civilian congressperson, that's problematic. I mean, that's almost breaking your oath to a certain extent, right? Because you don't declare allegiance to the United States Army, you declare your fealty to the U.S. Constitution, right? So it seems like, or it sounds like, at least from the language this person has chosen to use, that this person's still a spy.
Yep.
First and foremost, and only secondarily a representative of the 600,000 people that she represents from her district.
Absolutely. I think it would be a good idea for citizens to demand that the reps can't be separated from them by experiences they can't possibly know. So absolutely, in this lady's case, once you're a spook, you can't run for office, because as your constituent, I can't know barely anything about your background. I mean, literally, I could know enough that they could fill half a page on Wikipedia, and that would be it. I think about somebody like, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She was a bartender before she was elected. She was dealing with ordinary people day after day. How can citizens know where their elected representatives stand without knowing their full backgrounds? Think about like Anderson Cooper. Anderson Cooper had an internship at the CIA before he became a journalist. Would any of you guys have known that if I hadn't said it? Certainly not from watching Anderson Cooper on CNN. He wouldn't tell anybody that. But that's the kind of thing that we need to be watching out for.
Yeah, I mean, just if you're always able to hide behind something, if you have the shield of saying, "Hey, I can't talk about these things," then what's to say that shield's not just going to keep being brought up again and again, and there's no way that anybody can verify it because it's out of the normal citizen's hand.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, great point. Hey, last thing, you mentioned Ocasio-Cortez being a bartender and being 29 years old. Anybody else noticing that the Republicans, or at least the serious conservatives, are scared shit of her? That's why they're going on the attack. They attack her because, she's just a bartender. She can't know what's going on in the Senate. She can't, or in the House. She can't run national policy. It's like, these conservatives claim to be, we're for the rural folk, we're for the average man, right? We're for Joe the plumber. And then as soon as a liberal who talks like a liberal gets elected, now suddenly her experience gap is an issue. It's like, Jesus, she's a freshman representative. She's not even a senator. Let's give her a break. The fact that they're attacking her so much tells me they are scared shit of her, and maybe they should be.
Yeah, it's really fun to watch the show.
It's like a club mentality. And you see the same thing in the military, guys who have completed basic versus those who have done OSET versus those who have done a combat tour or whatever. It's always you show up, but then even though you've met all the qualifications to be in the job, you're still not quite good enough yet. That you just keep moving the goalpost to make this person look like a fool, which is, like you said, a sign that they are terrified of her.
Yeah, she's the future.
When they have to share videos of her dancing as a college student as some kind of, oh my God, Footloose, we're gonna burn the barn down or some bullshit. When we're to that point, it's like, okay, we're watching SNL now, and just stop paying attention, because there's nothing going on. There's nothing of substance there. It's just terror. But it is really fun to watch.
It wasn't even a provocative dance, right? No, it was a pretty light-hearted dance on a rooftop as like a recruiting video for Boston University. Like, why? I don't even understand. But hey, you know what they're scared of? They're scared of a lot of things about her, but here's one. She looks like the future, okay? Yeah. She is a person of color from the Bronx who is young and working class. That's what America's starting to look like. And the more America starts to look that way, the harder it's going to be for the good old GOP to win elections, at least with their current platform.
BT, what do you got to close us out for today, brother?
My last one's a short one, but it's the Coast Guard is now officially the only branch of the military that is currently unfunded. And right now, 6,400 members are on furlough, and 2,100 are working without pay, identified as essential workers. And it hit Twitter last night and seemed to blow up pretty big. So on Twitter, the article came out that the Coast Guard had released a 5-page document titled "Managing Your Finances During a Furlough," and it was giving our Coast Guard members sorts of ways of surviving not being paid, such as holding a garage sale, babysitting, or serving as a mystery shopper. And
jeez,
I didn't look at it, but apparently the Coast Guard removed it. And so when I went to go find it, the first one that I pulled up comes, it's from Apprisen.com, and it's managing your finances during a furlough. And, it's all of the same information. And then when you look at the one that the Coast Guard actually released, and I'll make sure the links are in the article, the show notes. But this came out from CGSUPRT. They didn't even spell out Coast Guard support. It's got the Coast Guard emblem, and it is pretty much verbatim the exact same document that is this, I mean, essentially boilerplate thing. And it's absurd because, you know, they have things like, pull up your sleeves and go ahead and make your finances lean. Like most people live paycheck to paycheck. I don't know the numbers, but we all know that most Americans don't have a lot of money saved up. Nope. And I mean, especially people in the military, whether you make good choices or bad choices with your finances. I mean, I've been everywhere. I've been completely, you know, I've talked about that before. I've been bankrupt with, you know, $12,000 a year coming in when I think the poverty level was 16. So, I mean, you have these people in the Coast Guard reading this document, and then the Coast Guard, I don't even feel that this is officially from the Coast Guard. Like somebody just said, hey, put out this document because it's coming from this company. They couldn't even have the decency to, it doesn't look official. It looks like something somebody pretending to be in the Coast Guard would make up as an official document. But I mean, we have real people that are still not getting paid over this insanity of the border wall.
Yeah, it is. I remember being flat broke in the service, but I always, you know, that for all 6 years I was in, I never had much in savings. And so, you know, losing a paycheck, even or half a paycheck, that would fuck up my whole world. You know, it just, at one point, my first son was born when I was still in the service. And being at work without pay, that's, you know, I guess the furloughed guys, okay, I still don't like that. It's still fucked up, but you're out there, whoever it is, the guys that are patrolling the coast and everything, without a dime to show for it, to take care of their families. Could end up dying in service, get their $400,000 SGLI money while they're still not getting paid because the government isn't fucking open. But it's still, I get why I know that the Coast Guard's part of Homeland Security, and that's one of the reasons. Why that is, I don't know. Why can't the Coast Guard be exempted? You know, it just fucking blows my mind.
Hey, real quick, here's a thought about the Coast Guard. Anybody else see that meme that's been flying around about, it's like a map of the United States, Canada, and Mexico, and it shows where the border wall would be, like if it was completed. And then it says, and then it's got thousands of arrows pointing to all the places that the border wall won't cover. Do you ever notice that most of them are like the sea coast?
Yep.
So if we're really on the verge of a national emergency, like the president told us, wouldn't the Coast Guard be like the first motherfuckers that need to get their pay, right? Like if it's a national emergency and most drugs come either through airports, the coasts, or the legal entry points hidden in cars, like in San Diego, wouldn't the Coast Guard be like right up there with ICE and Customs and Border Patrol to be funded? It just seems to me that would be the case. But the whole thing's a show, as we've discussed. None of this is real. It's an imagined, constructed emergency, and that's all it is.
And there's still however many hundred active duty troops at the border that I know that when I went through the lists, you know, there were quite a few MP units in there, guys that are on active duty that probably got back from Iraq or Afghanistan or wherever recently and now are going to the border. And I don't agree with their mission, but I also don't agree with wasting their fucking time.
Yeah. Hell yeah.
Well, that's it for my last one.
Awesome. Well, you know, I'm impressed. We did 6 headlines in about an hour and 4 minutes of actual material. And yet it felt like we talked about a lot, didn't it?
It did.
Yeah. I felt like it went well.
Which is great, because I mean, if we can, you know, I think an hour to an hour and 15 minutes is like the sweet spot. Obviously, sometimes we're going to be longer, sometimes we're going to be shorter. That's just natural. But I think in a lot of ways that is sort of a sweet spot for how much people, you know, how long people want to listen.
Yeah, I think that's
and how long you can hold their attention.
Yeah, I think right around an hour is good. But like you said, you know, it's a pretty dense hour. You know, it's a lot of information about a lot of different stuff, and we also kind of cross-talked a little bit about a few different topics as well. So yeah, it's a bit. We're on Twitter at Fortress on a Hill, and also on Facebook.com at Fortress on a Hill. You can find our main blog page and our full collection of episodes at fortressonahill.com. iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Patreon, Spotify, you name it, almost anywhere you listen, we're already waiting for you. And hey, we're always in the market for more Patreon supporters. Please consider becoming a contributor at patreon.com. If you're not into doing a monthly payment, think about giving us a couple bucks on PayPal. The link for that is in the show notes. Skepticism is one's best armor. Never forget that. We'll see you next time.
You good people, and listen to my song. I hope you'll pay attention. I will not